Okay, welcome to the next Robot Framework Open Space, our monthly open space where everyone can join our nice meeting, bring topics, discuss topics. And today we have a special guest. So we have Pekka Klärck here, our core developer and also the inventor of Robot Framework. And Pekka, you will, as I was informed, show a little bit about Robot Framework next releases and the roadmap, right? You're muted.
Hi,
Yeah.
can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Awesome. Sorry, I hope everything is like somehow set up because I needed to look after a little one and I just got to the club room at our basement 15 minutes ago, so trying to set up everything. Good, this works. Yeah, well, actually, I think the idea was to go first through Robot Framework 7.1, which is already out. So look at some of those new features there. I plan to do some kind of examples here, see what are the key features, and then we are also going to look at 7.2 roadmap, what's there at the moment, and possibly talk also a little bit about user guide upgrade. Depends on how much time we have. We have 1 hour, right? So that's
At least.
yeah. Okay. Well, let's try to keep it in 1 hour. So at least my presentation part. So of course we can continue discussion. I have some extra, not unlimited amount of extra time, but at least half an hour extra if needed. So should be fine.
Okay, then go ahead, share your screen, and we enjoy the show.
Okay. Let me first. I was trying to find where the release notes for Robot Framework 7.1 so before I get started. But yeah, now I have them here. How does Zoom work? Host disabled attendee screen sharing. You are on mute now if you try to say something, but
you can go now.
Cool. I'm sharing. Do you see Rene's face via my? There's cool effects possibly. Okay, so let's go. So this is Robot Framework 7.1 release notes for, and I was planning to go through some of the key features here. Not all. It's not huge release, but still doesn't make sense to go through all of this enhancement here, but some of the key ones related to listener interface and var syntax, I think. Listed here in the top in the release notes are the key features. So listeners have been enhanced. The var syntax that was introduced in Robot Framework 7.0 has been enhanced, and then there's been also few other enhancements. I think we could quickly take a look at the release notes here first, and then go to see these things in live. First of all, the listener has been enhanced. So there was a huge amount of enhancement to the listener API in 7.0 release. Most importantly, nowadays, the listener version 3, which is the more powerful API available to got separate hook methods for all starting and ending keywords and control blocks. So you can do a lot of enhancement, a lot of kind of interesting manipulation to test cases, test data, and also results during execution. There have been some new enhancement in 7.1. One is that is this listener priority. I'm not going to explain that with an example because that would be quite complicated, require multiple listeners. But the idea here is that nowadays you can give kind of an priority for your listeners. Should it be called before other listeners or after them? Of course, when you have a lot of... Go ahead.
No, I think that was not a question.
Okay. So yeah, listeners are by default called so that, if I remember correctly, listeners that you register from the command line are called first, and then listeners that libraries possibly register are called after, and they are called in the order they basically are specified from the command line, and then by the order, if they are library listeners, in the order where libraries have been imported. But this new listener priority functionality makes it possible that you can specify that, okay, my listener has high priority or very low priority, well, or medium priority. The priority is basically an integer, and the higher it is, the higher priority your listener has. So if you set your listener priority to 1000, then it's going to be called before any other listener that has lower priority. And the default priority is 0, and you can also go negative. So if you think your listener has low priority, then you set it to something like -1000 or -100. The motivation here is that if you're going to do some kind of a data manipulation, you probably want your listener to be called early. And then on other cases, if you're analyzing results or something, you probably want them to go later. Typically, this doesn't matter. This is not at all important for many listeners, but I think Rene may want to say something. I think this was very important use case for you with the data driver, if I remember correctly. Do you want to say something about that?
It was. Yeah, I can.
Have you tried it already?
No, not yet. Not yet had any time for that. So for those who do not know, data driver. It's basically an add-on for Robot Framework that does data-driven test generation based on external data files like CSV files, Excel files, or whatever you like, and like model generation. And it works as a library listener. So that means you're importing it into a library with library space data driver, which means by nature it is called after the command line listeners. And command line listeners typical would be, for example, listeners that send information to a Allure report, that is a listener, or send information about your test status to a test management tool. And some of those listeners are collecting on Start Suite the amount of test cases to send them to the test management tool, create these test cases there. And then while the tests are executing on every end test, they are updating the result in the test management tool. So you see they're popping up 5 test cases or 1 test case, and then they get green. And the problem here was because those listeners that you're typically attached to your robot process over the command line report to, for example, X-ray, there is 1 test case in that suite. And then data driver is called and creates 500. And then on end test, it tries to send 500 test results, and that does not work. So the one listener is the one that wants to manipulate data, and the other one is the one that wants to get reliable information of the suite, so that one want to be called afterwards. So therefore, you can then now set with the priority, you can say things that manipulate stuff is called early. Things that want to get something that is ready manipulated and get the final result want to get called very late. So that was the basic idea. And I think there was also other community requests that said, hey, couldn't we just make library listeners come first? And I said, nah, maybe there are other conflicting requests. So having it controllable is good.
Yeah. I remember someone was saying that they would like library listeners be called first, and then these others afterwards. And I was like, well, I don't have really like opinion on that, but I was kind of 100% sure that if you change the order, then it's going to affect someone who actually likes it the other way, or well, might actually like what doesn't matter what they like, but they've adjusted the code to work the way it behaves. So if you would have changed the default behavior, things wouldn't have any more worked. But now this makes it pretty flexible to change it. Of course, the problem is that you have 2 listeners that are not kind of cooperating. Then one thinks that, okay, I'm very important, and sets its priority 1000, and then other one thinks that I'm super important, and then it sets its priority 1 million, and then actually the earlier one was more important in this case. So it can be, there can of course still be problems, but then it's I don't know, could listeners possibly, because this is something that listeners can set dynamically, so maybe if needed, listeners can themselves have some kind of possibility to configure the priority from the command line or whatever. Anyhow, that feature is now in robot, so we expect tools to start using it. Another enhancement, which is very important actually in my opinion related to listeners, is that listeners can change execution status. And this doesn't mean like test statuses. The listeners can, in the end test method, change test status whatever they want. This is beneficial if, for example, the listener notices that something went wrong, and you don't want the test to pass, even though all the keywords executed correctly. The listener has some extra information from some external systems or wherever. So that has always been possible, that they can change test status. But although they kind of technically could change also keyword status, now that Robot Framework 7.0 added the possibility to have these end keyword methods in listener version 3, they could change the keyword status to fail, for example, if there was something wrong that listener detected, but that didn't actually affect anything. The keyword status was set to fail, but the test execution still ended. But nowadays, if that happens, then execution is actually affected. This is something I'll show shortly as a live example. Another enhancement is that listener version got methods related to library, resource file, and variable file imports, and so it's now feature complete with listener API 2 that already had those earlier. So now there's basically no reason anymore to use this listener version 2, that's the older version. Listener version 3 has been the default listener version already since Robot Framework 7.0. So you need to explicitly kind of opt in to use listener version 2, and now there's the same methods in both. The last enhancement mentioned here related to while loop limits was that earlier you could technically change while loop limits, but that didn't actually affect execution at all. So, well, it didn't really work, but that was kind of a bug that has been fixed. Other enhancements, like a group of enhancement here, is the enhancement of var syntax. Var syntax was introduced in 7.0 as well as the kind of major listener enhancements, and it is a new syntax to create variables dynamically in local scope or in test or suite scope. Basically, the idea of the var syntax is that it replaces old keywords set variable, set test variable, set suite variable, and so on. And makes it kind of a uniform syntax for creating variables, because as you may know, many people probably know, if you use this keyword, set variable, for example, works totally differently than set test variable. Set variable, you assign the returned value to a local variable, and then set test variable, you specify the variable name and the value. So the var syntax is kind of uniform way to create variables. It had two limitations compared to old keywords. One was that it didn't lock the value like these keywords did, so that was changed. So now they lock the value that was created. And the other one is that there's a new scope that you can specify that you want this variable that you create, you want it to be defined for the current suite and also all its child suites. Basically, this is useful if you use in suite setup or suite setup, so that you want it to be the variable be available also for child suites. That was possible with set suite variable already earlier, but this var syntax didn't support it. It only supported global, which sets it to also all the suites that are going to be executed, or suite that only sets to the current suite, not the child ones. Other enhancement here. This first one is actually, in my opinion, really convenient. The log file and report file paths that are logged to console are terminal hyperlinks on terminals that support them. The only more used terminal that doesn't support terminal hyperlinks is the old Windows console, but the new Windows terminal that is actually, if I understood it correctly, it's the default one nowadays in Windows 11. Also supports them, so even Windows get these benefits. You'll see this shortly if you haven't already tried Robot Framework 7.1 and seen it. Another one is, again, something that Rene has been requesting, and again related to data driver, is possibility to use named arguments programmatically better than earlier. There's Robot Framework APIs for creating keywords are kind of expecting Well, the old APIs earlier were kind of basically expecting everything to be strings exactly in the same way as you have in data. But already earlier, it was possible to use non-string values, but then if you wanted to use named arguments, that didn't really work out. So now there's a new API for that. This was kind of a struggle because we tried to introduce an API for this purpose already in 7.0, but it had backwards incompatibility problems and was actually bad design also otherwise. So it was removed in 7.01, but now this new API was introduced and hopefully it works. I'm not sure, have you, Rena, had time to try that for anything real yet, but if you
Yeah,
have,
I think I tested it during development. We had a chat there about how the API would look like, and so I implemented that then. So that works well. It's mostly relevant for API users that want to manipulate keyword calls or create keyword calls
exactly.
from Python side,
Yeah,
and want to give something else that's not a string argument. Yeah.
yeah. Basically, it's you would be using possibly pre-run modifier that is
Yeah.
creating manipulating test cases, but more likely it would actually be a listener that is doing this manipulation, because pre-run modifiers are able to only manipulate the actual test case body, not keywords those test cases are calling. So kind of advanced use cases and not something that most people are going to use directly, but then they are going to benefit from this. The tools are going to get more powerful, and tools don't need to resort on hacks that are going to break in the future and so on.
Yeah. We actually just got a question from YouTube. Will the keyword set test variable, set local variable, and so on, I think you get the idea, be deprecated at some point, or will they coexist?
Well, certainly not in the foreseeable future. Of course, in the long run, if the var syntax works well, we kind of would like to use that, but no plans. They are so widely used that there's no real benefit from that.
Yeah,
For
I would
example,
also
yeah, run
maybe
keyword
in
is also another other one that we are not going to remove in the near future, even though if else structure has been there forever. Well, not forever, but still 5.0. Actually, kind of related, but there's one limitation still with var and with if, that if you use this in suite in setups, then setups, they must be keywords at the moment. There's no possibility to have a control structure directly as a setup. So if you want to, for example, set a variable dynamically in suite setup directly without calling a keyword, just want to do it there, you need to use set suite variable or set global variable. You cannot use var syntax directly in suite setup. Of course, you can use a keyword in suite setup, and that keyword then uses var syntax.
you could name it
And
set suite variable also.
button.
I mean, if we so just imagine if we would deprecate those variables or those keywords, you can easily just implement them yourself and
Yeah,
use
yeah, of
var
course you can.
inside. So,
Yeah, of
but
course you can.
I think in general, of course, so the point is with backwards incompatibilities that we do introduce. We normally always consider the question is like, okay, that backwards incompatibility, does it massively overshoot the disadvantages with their advantage that they introduce? So if we would say, yeah, 50% of our users will be happy and the other 50% will be mad, we typically will not do it. So the advantage of a new thing that kills something old needs to be really big compared to the other one. Otherwise, we always would try to find an alternative that is compatible with both ways. So deprecating a keyword that is absolutely fine and works well, there is typically no advantage in just removing that keyword. Except of these things, it would make our development life so much more easier. So like things that we are thinking about, like pipe separated format, deprecating because it would improve parser functionalities or stuff like that. So we always first look on the disadvantage, what is hindering us deprecating stuff. And I think in the past we did quite well taking a lot of considerations. Sometimes we broke stuff unintentionally and then reverted it, but that was not that often the case. So I think typically we had good reasons for deprecating old stuff.
Yeah, there are typical reasons, and we try to also make it somehow kind of sane, the deprecation, so that if, for example, we were to remove set suite variable at some point, we would first change the documentation, say that, okay, this is considered deprecated, but there would be absolute no warning anywhere. And then after some releases, like 2 years, we could then possibly start emitting deprecation warnings. And then we could continue emitting deprecation warnings quite a long time until we would in the end actually remove the keyword. This way, people upgrading from some old robot framework version to newer one wouldn't get the test case broken because there's no keyword anymore. This is of course kind of these are kind of keywords in built-in, and the only kind of benefit we get from removing them is that the number of keywords in built-in gets smaller, which is kind of a good goal, because we don't want to have unused stuff there. But then again, it's not really a big benefit. But whereas for this pipe separated format that we'll get back to later, because that 7.2 stuff is something that will benefit us hugely if you remove it, and there are actually concrete benefits.
Yeah.
Kind of related to this,
by the way, could you maybe zoom in a little bit so that it's easier viewable on mobile devices? So I think we don't need the tree, for example, on the left side.
Does that work? It does. Ooh.
Yeah. Not sure if you can remove the. Yeah, perfect. That's awesome.
Yeah. Kind of related. We need to get back to the real agenda here soon. But related is that we related to deprecation discussion is that we introduced continue and break statements in Robot Framework 5, if I remember right, when we introduced. It could have been also 4. Anyway, we introduced them when we added while loops. Because before that, we had for loops, and then there was just keywords for breaking out. Like there was and still is keyword exit for loop and continue for loop. And of course, those keywords didn't really work too well with while, because it actually had for in their name. So we decided that instead of having these keywords, and instead of adding something like some other keywords for while loops or something, we add new control structure. We were already adding more control structure, so it made sense to add this kind of native break and continue instead of using them as keywords. So these keywords, exit for loop and break or continue for loop, still exist, but those are something that I kind of believe that we should start deprecating somewhat soon, because there's really no benefit in having them in built-in anymore. They don't work with while. They're just confusing, and you wouldn't use those in suite setup or somewhere anyway, because they won't work. So they may be loudly deprecated in, say, Robot Framework 8 or something, but that's still, they've been available for a long time. And even if we would deprecate them loudly so that you would get deprecation warnings, then we could keep them around, because they don't really hurt that much in built-in, but they're still confusing. Good. The next feature here of a new kind of major enhancement, there are some new translations. There's a Korean translation has been added. That's awesome. And then Dutch translation has been updated. And there's actually one thing I want to point out here is that with these Dutch translations, we got these from the Dutch community. I don't understand Dutch, so I didn't really review what they are. But I believe there was some multiple people discussing about those, so I believe that they are good. What we did is that we just replaced the old terms. So there's actually a backwards incompatible problem there, that if you've been using Dutch data with those old terms, then that won't anymore work. There was discussion that we should try to enhance our localization system so that we could deprecate this, but it turned out to be surprisingly complicated when I looked at it, and we decided at least now to do it so that we just replace them, because the Dutch community was kind of agreeing that these are much better. But this is something that we may need to return later if there are more cases where existing translations are changed, because it kind of is not very convenient if the translation is widely used, and if we change something there, we probably should have a deprecation system. But that's not just as easy as I was kind of expecting. The last feature enhancement here is that the support for embedded arguments has got a bit better. Like if you have this kind of keyword that has name like here it is a kind example. So it starts with the embedded variable, and if you use it earlier with like given good example, then that kind would actually get value given good. So the prefix there, that given prefix would also be included, but now you only get good, which is kind of what you probably expect, because this given when then prefixes are typically not considered to be part of the actual keyword name. They are just like prefixes. The other thing is that yeah, go ahead.
Do you want to continue with the 313 one, or are you still with the embedded?
Yeah, I'm done with that. Yeah.
Okay. Then actually regarding 313 support, we had a question in YouTube again. If the optional global interpreter lock now in 313, Python 313 could be something that could be used in robot framework, or would you say that could have some negative impacts?
I haven't tried actually that at all. So there's a Python 3.13 started kind of the process that they hopefully get rid of the global interpreter lock in Python, which what basically the main problem with this GIL is that it makes threaded Python not very fast.
So it's basically all running in one thread on one core, every Python process. And if you want to have multiple cores having concurrency at the same time, you need to have a sub-process and not just use threads.
Right? Yeah, so yeah, but then I'm moving away from that if at all possible. The problem that has been, of course, a kind of pain point for Python for like decades, but it's also have been complicated to remove, because this GIL has also made developing Python extension in C pretty simple, and that has been, of course, a very key thing. For example, NumPy and stuff like that, scientific Python stuff is C extension, and that has been easy extension API has probably been a bigger boost for Python than GIL has been a problem. So there are pros and cons with that, but that also another problem has been that if it's removed, then the problem has been that it has made this non-threaded Python slower, kind of considerably slower, and that's of course not a good trade-off. That if you make threaded Python faster by making non-threaded Python slower, then people aren't going to be very happy. But anyway, they are experimenting that and trying it, but it's kind of a separate build at the moment. So the default Python 3.13 doesn't have anything like that. So you need to have a separate build, I think.
Well, I thought it was actually switched by command line arguments or so.
I believe you need a separate build, but you might be right as well. Anyway, it's not really
the glossary of 313 says there is a -- disable -gil or an environment variable Python GIL equals 0 that does that. So
okay. Well, it's possible, but it's possible it's like that. But anyway, this is not something that I don't expect to really matter too much for us at the moment, especially because the robot framework itself has a problem that it's not really thread safe anyway. So, of course, if Python thread store gets better, then it also makes it more important for us to start trying to make robot framework thread safe. And of course, that's a goal for us, but it's kind of long-term goal.
But is robot framework using threads anyway?
No, but well, timeouts are using threads, but otherwise not. Okay. But the problem is that robot itself has global state stored in kind of module level stuff, and that breaks if you try to use robot framework, run robot framework itself in different threads. So we need to get rid of all that global state, make execution better with different kind of contexts and so on.
Okay, but also libraries could use threads and make something like concurrent processing stuff.
Libraries use threads and often, but the problem is that also that often causes problem, because if when there's a thread going on background when the keyword isn't anymore executing, then it very often, if it ends up communicating with robot like logging something, it typically just corrupts the output XML file. So the thread story with robot framework isn't very good, so we need to look at that. But I don't expect this Python 3.13 enhancement to be super important for us. But if someone believes it's important in their use case, please go ahead and try and see. But my understanding is that even though it's in this release to some extent, it's still quite early, and most extensions, for example, doesn't support it properly and so on. So it's kind of beta, if even that state at the moment.
Yeah, there was then also the comment maybe something like Pubot, but I think for Pubot the situation is actually that you have to execute multiple robot processes in parallel, and even things that we have let's say sketched or drafted in some context is a successor of Pubot. We would still use multiple processes, and each process has its own kind of running instance. So it would not be multiple threads in one robot. It would typically be multiple robots and then committing back to one central instance to send the results back to be more safe.
There's Python, of course, the thread story in Python should and could be better, but then the reality is that if you want to get really good performance with something, you want to use processes anyway, because with processes you can then distribute to different machines. You don't need to have everything in the same machine. Even if you had well-working threads that can utilize all your cores, then if you use processes, you can actually split them to different machines and you have more cores available. And then if one of those, for example, crashes totally, then it doesn't crash the whole thing on something like that. So it's kind of, in my opinion, working with processes, it's anyway easier. With threads, things are, there's so small problems with threads can create so big problems for you than hard to debug problems because you are dealing with common state and so on. With processes, sharing state is more complicated, but then you actually need to kind of take care of that and have some kind of a solution for actually sharing state if you need that and so on. Cool. If there
by the way, for the others, before you start running again, if you have questions, it would be also good if you just raise your hand and then I can interrupt Pekka once he's done with one topic.
Yeah, that would be good if you can run a help there, because I have full screen display here going on, so cannot really I cannot see questions, but you can feel free to ask. I just realized that I need to find some kind of a theme where it seems I haven't been sharing too much lately with PyCharm. Maybe I should I make Daniel happy and use VS Code instead? Let's see, because I don't have anything there. I could probably use this.
Looks better, but I'm working on a PyCharm version, so.
So maybe for those in the internet wondering about what we are talking. So at the moment we have there are some robot framework extensions out there for IDEs. For PyCharm, there's basically the robot framework language server, which is the most used right now. The problem is it's not compatible with robot framework 7 and will never be. And the company that is maintaining it has unfortunately not officially deprecated it yet, but they also just officially said they will only deliver to their real customers and not do anything else. And that one is also the robot framework language server for VS Code, which is also not maintained anymore. And you should switch to robot code or potentially others. I'm not aware of any other that is really good right now. But unfortunately, there's no PyCharm at the moment for robot code. But hopefully will be in the future.
Yeah, my problem there was that with PyCharm it's a bit more complicated to change the font size to be, and I hadn't. If you do it, then you want to set up a profile for you that's easy to switch between different like presentation fonts and so on. I hadn't done anything like that lately. I think it would have been good enough for our needs. But anyway, let's use VS Code here, because then also the var syntax actually works. So there weren't that many features like that I want to show live here, but there was this like var enhancement. So basically, now if I do something like example, and have that, then what will happen basically compared to earlier ones is that this value will be logged. Of course, we now see it here, so it doesn't really benefit us much. But if this value itself would contain variable, then seeing what we actually created here would have benefits.
Sorry?
So I could run this. Pardon?
There's something wrong with your VS Code. Robot Framework extension is loading and loading, and the color seems strange. So maybe
it's totally possible. This is super old because I haven't used VS Code
maybe
for like,
maybe you have some extension.
Yeah. I'm going to run this from my terminal simply because then I know what I'm going to get. So if I now run that awesome test here, so this was the one enhancement, is that now these are paths are links unless you can disable them. And I think Daniel may have needed to do that with VS Code plugin because VS Code had some other kind of mechanism for detecting these to be kind of a local links and having something, but it's possible to disable this. There's I think it's console links off or something like that, and now they are not anymore. So if they get in a way, you can disable them. They are disabled also automatically.
Actually, I totally missed that feature, and I now know why the code playground on the web page is not showing the log and the output HTML anymore in at least the path there. Okay, good to know.
They should be automatically disabled. So, for example, if I redirect output there and then we look at that, they are not linked anymore. So
I did actually override the std out and catch the std out, and it's still there. So it's I think nothing that Robot Framework can detect.
Yeah. So yeah, that's anyway pretty handy because now I can, for example, click here. These, by the way, terminal things typically aren't clickable like this, like directly. You need to typically, at least the terminal specific, of course, but typically hold Control there and then click. That's kind of convenient. So what the awesome change was this message. This isn't here if you would run this with Robot Framework 7.0. But so it's not like a huge thing, but actually it was interesting that there was at least 3 feature requests, I think, or maybe some of them were on Slack, but there were some questions on Slack and then issues in the issue tracker saying, hey, why isn't this done when the old syntax did it? So kind of clearly people cared. So now it's there. The other var enhancement was that I can now say this scope, I could set the suites, but here it doesn't matter at all. This is not this suite doesn't have any child suite, so this doesn't change anything. But if this was in the suite initialization file, then it would change also the value. Oh well, wouldn't change. Would create this variable so that also the lower level suites would be able to access it. The other enhancement, then, the major enhancement, they relate to listeners. And as I said already earlier, I'm not going to show the listener priority thing because it requires multiple listeners. And anyway, also something that you don't that often need. And it's not very complicated if you need it. But I want to demonstrate this other one. I'll just call this listener, it doesn't really matter. And I implement now end key. Actually, what should I implement? Well, I implement end keyword. I need to add a keyword here. At the moment, we don't have any keyword in our test. We have just a var, and this is not going to be called when that var thing ends because it's not a keyword, it's a var. I needed to implement end var to catch that. But
also in version 2 or only in version 3?
Version 3. Version 2, it's end keyword. It also catches all the key control structures. But in version 3, which this is, I'm not specifying listener version here, so it's version 3. And if you aren't too familiar with listeners, unfortunately, there's no time for explaining them too thoroughly.
I will post a YouTube link.
Exactly. So we had a longer presentation in Robocon some time ago about listeners, but this enhancement in 7.0 are newer than that. So there's it's partly outdated, but anyway, you get at least a basic idea what you can do with them. So listener version 3, this end keyword hook method is called automatic for every keyword that ends, and it's always going to be called with 2 arguments. First one is typically named data, and then the other one is called result. You don't, if you want, you can add type hints. It kind of makes it maybe easier. I think I want to implement like this from robot import running and result. These are modules because this data happens to be of type running keyword, and then this result is result keyword. And what I can now do with the result, I can, for example, blindly set the status to pass, which is most likely a bad idea and something that could get you fired if you do this, because then, of course, this means that all your keywords are going to pass. It's most likely not a very good idea. But let's see how it works in practice anyway. And so let's add listener enhancement as well. And then
I think at the moment you seem to have some connection issues. You still see a frozen screen of your VS Code.
Yeah, I'm noticing it as well. Yeah, I'm noticing it as well that I'm most likely having some kind of it's my I need to tether through my phone to do the way I am. So I'll move the phone. Also, it could be that running on Linux and Zoom they don't really work together always.
Now it had a major hiccup, and now you're live again, and we see listener enhancements and then line 6 blinking.
Okay,
all good.
Let's hope it works. So it can be the network problem, or it can be that there's a problem with Zoom and Linux. Let's hope it works. So let's have a keyword like fail and like that. And then let's have another one. And now if I run this, obviously it fails in the first oops. And the second one isn't executed. It's shown in the log file, but not really run. If I would execute this, and well, if I do execute it with listener, I use the listener command line option, and then I put just name like that, then it passes, which is of course, well, the feature works as expected, but this may not be a good idea in general. The message here is failed. That wasn't changed because that was blocked. That was locked message, but the keyword status was changed from failed to pass unconditionally. This is obviously super bad idea to do it this way, that you unconditionally do something like this. Probably always change the status unconditionally is stupid, but what you could do is, of course, is that you have something. Most likely it would be something like this, that if result status, actually there's also a handy property. If result passed, and something bad happened, then I could use this same result status is passed, so I can just say result failed. That works as well. And then I would have this kind of something.
Are those just setup properties, or so they are? If you set both true,
that will setting this property will actually set the status. So it will, what it does is going to set the status to fail.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's see. maybe I'll just change this. So I'll just say log. Well, I can log that example because that should be available. It was specified to be a suite level variable. So that should work. So now my listener checks that the keyword passed. Maybe this might be easier to understand if I just use these constants. I'm sorry for. There's type hint for specifying possible values, and it's kind of I haven't used VS Code, so that I haven't seen that it can actually complete those possible values. That's actually pretty handy. So now if the sets was passed, so it initially passed it, but something happened, and this method that is now returning false, so nothing bad happened, of course, could then validate something like look at the database or I don't know, whatever. Notice, okay, things didn't work out. Now it succeeded, but now if something actually did happen, so this condition here would return true. Oh, it's still. Why didn't that? This is interesting.
Can you set it keyword, by the way, to anything else than pass or fail, like no run or not run?
You can set it to not run. This is actually, there's a good chance that I will just encounter the bug here because the keyword has been failed, but test still succeeded. That absolutely shouldn't happen. Interesting. Let's see if I add another keyword here. What happens then? Set it to not run, I think things wouldn't work very well. The statuses that you can use are skip, pass, and fail. And this is actually something I need to investigate what happens because the execution clearly stops, as you can see. The other keyword isn't run, but the status is pass. So we have a bug to be fixed in 7.1.1 clearly. It worked as we saw with when I was changing the failing keyword to succeed. That succeeded fine, but there's something now wrong going on. And I'm super surprised because this looks like a bad enough bug that this shouldn't have passed our robot's own acceptance test. Clearly, it kind of works partially because this keyword isn't run, so as it shouldn't. But then, of course, this test case status should be fail as well. Interesting. I want to do one more thing. I want to see how it works with the keyword. User keywords. Does that still? No, it's still the same thing. Keyword is failed as expected, but then test status is still pass. So there are bugs. I need to look at that. Well, we were planning to do a 7.1 release anyway relatively soon. There's one other bug that has been reported, but this is of course much more severe. Apparently nobody has used this feature because nobody has yet reported it, but I hope you got at least an idea how it should have worked. But something isn't right. I'll see later, hopefully later today evening. I'm not sure, do I have time for that? I need to go to watch my kids' football match, but I'll definitely investigate this soon, and I'll post on the open space channel and see even I know what was causing this, and you will learn.
Money just proposed if you try to set result.failed to true, let's see what the setter is doing.
It should do the exact same thing because here's the code what it does. So it just says status to fail or pass based on what this is. So
yeah, and Mani also proposed, hey, we could implement something like keyword retry in that case, and that's why I was thinking, like, we don't have a keyword skip status right now, right? So it's not possible that we skip. We can skip a keyword without skipping a test case?
Yeah.
Okay, then we could kind of set the old failed one to skip and then try it new and set the new keyword then to pass if it passed, or finally fail it or so. Like in place re-execution.
It should actually behave so that if I set the result to skip.
You're again breaking up a bit, but I think now it works.
And this actually interestingly works. So there's something wrong with fail, which I don't get, but here I set it to skip, and then the test case was actually skipped.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. Like you cannot. What is if you have a pass and a skip keyword? This test is still skip, right? Because skip has a higher priority than the others.
Yeah. There's also a small bug here because the second keyword isn't shown, although it should be, like in the not run state. Need to investigate that as well.
No, I think we skip tests. We don't. Wasn't it so that we don't show the body?
In this case, I think it should show because
okay.
But that's a smaller problem than the other one. Why fail doesn't work at all. Interesting. I'm not really surprised that there's a bug like this in general. In the development phase, there's probably some good logical reason for that. I'm kind of surprised in a whole in our acceptance test because we typically try to be pretty thorough with those, and these kind of bugs are very, very uncommon. Bugs are, of course, common. I mean, there's always kind of bugs, things that you didn't take into account, but this is kind of the key functionality isn't working properly. Most likely those tests for this feature, because, well, I'm 100% certain there are some tests for this. Most likely those tests are only validating that this next keyword isn't executed and these statuses are so on. But yeah, I need to investigate that. Any questions about Robot Framework 7.1?
I don't see anything here in the chat. I can't look right now on the YouTube, so Mani just said, okay, funny thing, I tried this feature, but I only used it to failed keywords to pass, not the other way around. So it was used, but not the wrong way around.
Well, actually, I think this past keyword to fail is the more common use case, I would say, typically. Mani had this actually use case for this, that if I remember correctly, he has this automatic fixing of locators. So that if the keyword failed and then the locators didn't work, then wants to silence that failure and add a new keyword there to be executed after that. So that's actually a really valid use case for marking certain keyword to be passed when it was initially failed. notice that, okay, I want to kind of retry, that you disable that failure, and then you add a new keyword there. So then in the end result is that your log file will contain multiple keywords. If you want to remove those unsuccessful ones, you need to have auto logic then afterwards, pre-report modify or something like that. But yeah.
Yeah, you are breaking up again,
that's
but we
something
kind of,
I
think we kind of understood what you said. One thing maybe regarding the retrying keywords functionality, I think it's a valid approach to do that if you have a kind of a specific add-on for Robot Framework that generically want to retry some keywords or keywords on a list of retryable keywords of foreign libraries. But if you develop your own library and you want to have your own keywords, maybe sometimes try stuff multiple times or so, I think a proper way is definitely the run keyword method inside your dynamic library. So if you are not aware of that, you may want to have a look on the talk. I think there's also a browser library talk where Tatu explained about the Python libcore. And if you use Python libcore, it's pretty easy to make your own dynamic library. And then in your run keyword function, you can do stuff like retry the same keyword call without actually retrying a robot framework keyword, but just like the implementation of the keyword. So the implementation is done multiple times, not the keyword. And so you don't have a wasting in your logs. If you want that in your logs, of course, then this is maybe a proper way. Or if you want to do it outside of your library, then also.
Yeah, of course, there are many other ways, of course, also to retry. I mean, you basically can have just try except logic with the like while true loop with try except and handling errors until you succeed or something. So there are many different ways.
Then you have to do it in every keyword. If you do it try except in the run keyword with a loop, then you have it for all your keywords.
I know, but if you want to do it only in certain cases, then it's of course it's easy to do in single case like that, or maybe have a decorator does it even if you weren't using the dynamic API. But yeah, I agree that if your library needs retry mechanism, you should basically implement it in your library and not rely on robot doing that. But yeah, let's take a look at what's planned for 7.2. It's going to be, again, not massive release. That's why it's 7.2, not 8. But there's going to be some nice new enhancements. The three issues with critical priority here in that release are here. Both the first two ones are related to libdoc. Basically, the libdoc documentation thing is going to be the technology that is used for HTML is going to be replaced with newer tech. And as part of that, then we are going to add localization support for libdoc as well. This is something that Janne has been working with. The initial idea was to get it into 7.1, but there wasn't enough testing done when it was time to get 7.1 out. And we decided to move to 7.2. Basically, there's no other enhancement, functional enhancement than the localization. So it's not so super important at this point. But then the idea is that when we have the new tech, then it's easier then to add new enhancements. And also we plan to use the same new tech with log and report in the future. Janne isn't here, if I understand correctly. So, and I don't want to go showing what works and what doesn't work. This might be something maybe for a next open space or something where Janne could give a quick demo and explain like the web stuff that there is there and so on.
Yeah, maybe, but at that point, and as you see, there may be bugs still in these releases. We highly appreciate if you try out Robot Framework while it's in an alpha, beta, and release candidate state. So it's always good to, for example, also join the Devil channel in our Robot Framework Slack. If you're not part of the Slack, you can find the Slack if you go to robotframework.org and then go to the community section. There you can see the Robot Framework Slack and the forum. And typically also in the forum, Pekka will announce when a new version is released. We will also post that in the general channel in Slack, and also in the Devil channel, like development. So there you can also get notified when new releases are out. And it's highly appreciated to get some feedback, specifically here with the libdoc HTML, because there are not so many automated tests and of this UI, unfortunately, because no one has written them. Please try it out once it's in an alpha state with your own libraries, specifically if you have a little bit more complex situation, like you have type hintings, you have maybe specific formatting, you have a huge amount of keywords or stuff like that. Please try it out and see if it behaves as expected. At the moment, this is mostly just a technology change, so no fancy UI changes, but that technology change should then make the fancy UI changes possible afterwards. So contribution is highly welcome.
Yeah, the libdoc stuff has been merged to the main branch, so it's there already. So if you want to test it, you can already do it now. I hope that Janne will announce it somehow more publicly. Well, at this point, most likely only on Devel, and ask people to try it out and see what works and what doesn't work. And also then we are going to start asking for localization. This is going to be like libdoc UI localization. So that's the idea of the localization there at the moment. It's a separate topic. Then how do we want to handle keyword, like library localization, like keyword name localization, documentation localization, and so on. Of course, related but different. This is the basic making possible for libdoc UI to be. So that strings there are localized.
And we can finally have Schlüsselwörter in the libdoc documentation.
Then, in addition to libdoc, the other key feature here, which is, I hope that we get it implemented, it's possibly too big, I don't know, is this JSON support for output, so that we could get output JSON as part of execution. You can already now get, starting from Robot Framework 7 again, you can get output JSON with Rebot, so you get always output XML after execution, like we got here. Like if I run it, we get output XML. But if I want, I can now use the built-in Rebot tool and tell that I want new output, and I want it to be output JSON, and then I give it the old output XML as an argument, and now I get the JSON output. And so I got this one. We can get this, and then it looks something like this. The idea is that we would get this also as part of the it would be possible to get it as part of execution directly. There was also another kind of related enhancement that's already done. Nowadays, if I would do this with the development version of Robot Framework, that JSON output that we just got would look slightly different, because it will also contain statistics and errors like it, which weren't earlier included. The output XML contains this information, so it wasn't fully compatible with it. Especially this execution errors not being available meant that they would be lost, but now they are there. But yeah, we'll see. This basically will require implementing our own JSON writer that can write stuff in parts to the file. That's likely not the huge. Well, it's going to be effort, but I don't expect it to be super complicated. The main reason I'm kind of worried that what will happen with this issue is that it might be that loading those JSON files like afterwards can be super slow when they are big. I'm worried that that might be a problem, but we'll see when we get there. I, for example, noticed that when I tried to enable JSON schema validation in our acceptance test, when I added this enhancement for including errors and statics to JSON output files, not too big JSON output file took something like 25 seconds to validate, when with XML files that never takes more than I don't know, it doesn't even take a second. So it was surprising big time. I couldn't include that in acceptance because it was just too slow. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that. Some high priority enhancement here. The first one here is something that Rene already mentioned, kind of not related, like related to deprecation. This was deprecation to pipe separated format. So if you don't know, Robot Framework supports pipe separated format. I think this issue should have an example. So, actually, the issue about removing it has an example, I guess. So this is the typical way to create Robot Framework test cases, but also this works. So we can have pipes here around. And there are various problems with that. First, the biggest problem is that it makes much more complicated to create parsers for Robot Framework if we support also this format. Robot Framework obviously itself supports that, and then we don't get direct benefit if we don't support it anymore because we've already done that implementation. But the problem is that if we want to have parsers implemented with other languages for syntax highlighting purposes or something like that, or we want to have a faster parser implemented, for example, with C, this unnecessarily makes those parsers more complicated as well. And there doesn't seem to be much or any users for this syntax, so we plan to remove it. So that's why we are going to deprecate it in 7.2 and see are there actually users. This has been asked in the community survey last year, or last community survey. I don't remember was it last year or this year. Anyway, it was asked, and people didn't really care about this syntax. So deprecating it so that we'll actually get a message. There will be a loud deprecation warning. Will then let us know that what will happen. Should be equal. We plan to enhance that so that you can tell what types you are comparing. Now we have a separate keyword like should be equal as integers. We are not going to deprecate and remove that, but the idea is that we don't want to have, for example, keyword like should be equal as bytes. Instead, we just want to enhance should be equal so that you can tell that these arguments are bytes, and then robot will do conversion for you automatically. The next deprecation here is related to the idea that we would like to support in the future variables without the decoration, the curly braces, sorry. The dollars decoration would be that without those curly braces. So this would be like valid syntax. It kind of looks nicer without those, hard to type, at least if you're not on a US keyboard, hard to type curly braces, but supporting this syntax will have backwards incompatibility things, and we need to do deprecations first, and there's a lot of discussion about here. We'll see. This can get complicated as well, so this is something that we may need to delay. We'll see.
Yeah, I think what at least needs to be done first is the possibility of a keyword to tell Robot Framework that it want to have an unresolved syntax. So
there are various kind of backwards incompatibility concerns, but the main issue is that the browser library is using this syntax like dollar and then something as a mean to tell as a mean that this value, the keyword itself gets exactly this value, and then it will use robot APIs to see what variable value it actually contains. And the idea is that you can pass secrets to that keyword without accidentally that secret value being locked, even on trace level anywhere. Yeah. And if this actually would suddenly mean, well, first of all, they're using this, so this will cause a deprecation warning, and we basically need to have some other way for passing secrets without them accidentally being locked.
So, but this issue was now that it's first deprecated in the docs.
I think I would like to deprecate it actually. So yeah, well, if we agree that we want to have the new syntax at some point, like this syntax, then we should start deprecation process, and I would rather deprecate it so that there's a warning already now. But if it turns out to be too complicated and we cannot do it in 7.2, then I think we should at least deprecate it in the documentation and warn about that.
Yeah,
but
I would be generally fine if we deprecate that, you know the keywords, for example, like set suite variable, do get an argument with a variable name, but it has a decorator that it does not want to resolve that thing. So the keyword itself, set suite variable, get this name of the variable unresolved. This is, however, not working with dynamic libraries, which is actually the issue why we could not use that functionality in browser library for getting the string of the variable. So I'm absolutely fine if we could maybe deprecate that, including solving the unresolving of arguments. Then we can implement the keyword that way. That we say, okay, we don't want to get it auto-resolved, which automatically also means it's not locked. So like set suite variable does also not lock the argument because the actual given argument is $ curly braces value curly braces. It's not the value.
Yeah.
I think that would be the easiest way.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that API you mentioned is also some this kind of semi-public API. Otherwise, it's kind of bad. So there are many things related to this. Well, we'll see what happens. Then the final issue here with high priority is possible.
Well, you're breaking up again. Maybe you make
custom settings basically test cases.
Can you start again about the last thing?
Yeah. So the last issue here is this custom metadata for test cases. Well, there has been discussed some time, but basically it's very similar to tags, but instead of having it so that with tags it's just a list of strings, we want to make it so that you can have basically more or less like custom settings for test cases, and of course also for tasks that you need to tell to the parser that what is accepted, and then they don't have any special meaning to robot itself, but they will be just shown in the log and report, the same way as suite level metadata. There shouldn't be too much like technical issues with this one, like with some of the others had. So I don't expect
Can you
that
briefly
to be super
maybe show the example code that I did there? So because we have not yet discussed it in this stream, it was another meeting, I think in a board meeting we discussed it. So as you see here now, this documentation, tags, timeout, setup, teardown, these are all the settings or so-called settings that you can give for keywords or test cases. And if you would like, then
they are supported by robot. So they are kind of built in.
Yeah, they are currently supported by robot and they are built in, right? So sometimes we have the request heard, or actually multiple times from the community, we want to also, for example, log or define requirements that are linked to a test case or issues or something like this. So the idea would be here, like in this example, you tell Robot Framework that there are, in this case, two different custom settings, error handler and issue. And this first causes that the parser does not recognize those two things as wrong syntax, which it would theoretically right now. I think at the moment it does it actually? No, it does not recognize it as keyword because it's a reserved syntax. So at the moment that would be a parser error. But when you enable that as a custom setting, you will see, for example, here issue then #4409 in your actual log. And the good thing is because it's part of the model, after the parsing is done, you could also have something like pre-rebot modifier or listener or something like this that then alters the content and make a Jira link out of it or a GitHub link out of it. And also you could have a listener that reads the error handler entry, and if an error happens, it just calls that keyword, which means it's an error handling keyword for a specific test. So it enables possibilities for extensions. So the basic functionality would be it's included in the logs, and the extended functionality is because it's available over the API. You could configure things like data driver, like any other extensions with these custom configurations or custom settings here.
Yeah, basically this is to some extent very similar to tags as mentioned earlier, but the kind of the key thing is that here we have tags, something like there, and they are just all on the same line. And if you want them to be like stand out more, then this helps. One thing, by the way, Rene, let's not discuss it here, but one thing we need to discuss about here is that how to handle this when you have multiple values. Because at the moment, if you're talking about metadata, then these are combined together with spaces. So but we may want to store this as a list possibly. So that's a possibility. So we need to think how to handle stuff like that. But
yeah,
let's not get into that here. Yeah, those were the high priority issues at the moment. There are many high and critical priority issues. There are many other issues also here. I don't think it's good to go through them all. The one last kind of enhancement that I want to mention, it's not yet here, but something that I've been initially thinking quite a lot this week is Markdown support for documentation. The reason I've been thinking about this is that we are planning, we already kind of started the work to upgrade the user guide. So, and part of that will be changing the syntax from restructured text to Markdown, simply because there are more tools like platforms that support Markdown for something like user guide. And I've been thinking a lot about this Markdown otherwise, and it's just so widely used nowadays. It has its issues, the biggest issues being that there's no official single standard, so there's the various Markdown flavors that are not fully compatible. But I think that situation also kind of getting better, and even though there are multiple flavors, all flavors kind of works the same way in simple cases anyway, so even that doesn't hurt too much. So maybe it would be good to move kind of robot framework documentation to Markdown. So our own documentation, like user guide, of course, that really doesn't matter for users what we use the syntax there underneath, because what they see is the generated HTML. But the documentation you use in robot framework data as well, like the suite level documentation or test level documentation, keyword documentation, also keyword documentation libraries. So I think their Markdown would have also benefits. Now you can use Robot Framework's own markup, and which is the default actually everywhere, and it's the only syntax supported in Robot Framework data. But it's very limited syntax, and trying to enhance that isn't very good either, because then that's something new for people to learn. Restructured text is kind of a very good markup language, but it's not actively developed, and also it's more complicated than Markdown. It's also more powerful, so it has certain better features, but Markdown basically has won the markup language wars, so it's what everybody's using. So, and I believe we should switch that as well. So that's something that might be happening. The first step would be that we needed to enable Markdown support. The problem is that we don't support at the moment at all. You cannot use Markdown to write keyword documentation. You cannot use Markdown to write documentation in Robot Framework data. So we need to have some kind of Markdown support first, and then in the future we can think that should we make that the default syntax, or alternatively, which would be much better, is it can be somehow auto detect what syntax you are using and then use appropriate converter for that. But that's something that I just started discussing about that yesterday on the Devel channel. If this is something you are interested in, please join. I would be very happy if someone would help with that, because the first kind of problem here is that adding the Markdown support is that I started looking at what kind of Markdown module possibilities we have in Python. I knew that there's nothing in the standard library, so that we need to use an external module. But the problem was I was able to find 5 modules, and I'm sure there are more that look good, are actively maintained, and so on. So hard to know which one we should use. And an additional complexity for us is that I wouldn't like Markdown support to be an optional feature, especially if we try to make it the default for documentation. It should be mandatory kind of feature. But I don't want Robot Framework to have mandatory dependencies that you need to have install to use it. Because if you do them, then installing Robot Framework on environments where you don't have network connection gets more complicated. So I would
I think that's a
rather
good
have this
point.
Markdown module that we have vendor, so that we copy the source code and we distribute it with robot auto inside that, and that's kind of the some challenge. But yeah, if you're interested in this, of course you can ask now, but also otherwise, then just join the Develand channel, and if you're interested to kind of evaluate these Markdown modules and help with this, making the decision which one we should use.
Would it be a possibility to have a kind of a basic set of Markdown support that is kind of natively implemented by ourselves, and then have a full support with an external library? So because like we do already have with Robot Framework basic syntax some pretty basic situations like tables, bold, italic, stuff like that. If we would just take that feature set and support that feature set in Markdown, but then also extend like HTML embedding and stuff like that as an extension to that with an optional requirement. What about that?
I mean, it's definitely a possibility, but I think it also adds kind of complexity there. Then we need to do that. It's likely not going to be too easy task to even have the basic support. And well, if you do it, then I think it should be like really bare bones, so that the normal, because then we didn't need to support. I'm not sure even should we support tables, because basically we should just support stuff that you typically need in Robot Framework data, not think about keywords at all, like libraries. So that can be considered, but I'd first look at this vendoring possibility, because I know some of those Markdown models at least are pure Python, which basically means that, and if they don't have much dependencies, we could just basically vendor them. That's a relatively common approach. For example, of course, pip, that is a Python manager for that it needs to vendor a lot of things, because you cannot pip install stuff to get that pip needs. Pip needs to have everything built in. So we'll need to see, but it's possible that we could implement basic stuff ourselves and then have it as an optional. One thing, for example, we don't need to have as a working without the extension model is syntax highlighting. So that can absolutely be something that if you want to use syntax highlighting, which basically will require pigments installed separately.
But the cool thing would be if we have Robot Framework syntax highlighting built in Robot Framework, because we already know the tokens. So that should be, I mean, in general, that should be a pretty easy task. If we have a code block that contains Robot Framework stuff and the parser goes about that stuff and then highlights just the tokens.
Yeah, that's a good point. It shouldn't be too complicated, but then again, you probably don't need that too often when writing suite level documentation, for example.
And no, but for library documentation, that's definitely something. And also for keyword docs, you typically give examples or so. So also for resource files.
I know,
you may want to give an example how to use it.
But those are you only need those with libdoc. And then when you are using libdoc, I think having pigments available isn't that. I'm mostly thinking about like CI environments where you actually are running those test cases, not your test or development environments. Environment where you're running test cases that may be kind of outside any without any network connection.
But
and then
do you also mean the weird Robot Framework inside of an MD file support? No, you just mean like documentation format Markdown support, right?
So that you could write Robot Framework documentation, like suite documentation in Markdown. That's what I mean. But the idea that you would have Markdown file where you have embedded Robot Framework stuff that could be executed, I think that would be a valid enhancement too, but it's kind of it's different enhancement.
But this is basically just a custom parser, right? So
mostly, yeah. But it would be very easy to implement that in Robot as well. So we have that for restructured text, and it's much more complicated because it's complicated stuff. But for Markdown, it would be very easy to have basically parser inside robot. I think it would be like 10 lines of code or something. But it's not as useful enhancement as having Markdown as a syntax for writing documentation and so on.
Actually, I never thought about the requirement that we could actually do syntax highlighting in our documentation code blocks. That's maybe that we really should consider in libdoc, because, for example, like browser library, I mean, the built-in libraries are typically using tables for keyword examples. But browser library uses code blocks for that for better readability. But of course, we don't have syntax highlighting there. We just have links to other keywords. But maybe that would be a cool thing for libdoc HTML.
The restructured text, if you would use restructured text for library documentation and you would use code blocks, then you could use syntax highlighting. Libdoc even contains Pygment's CSS for that purpose. Yeah. But the robot framework's own syntax stuff doesn't support syntax highlighting, and that's I think that instead of trying to implement that, I think it would be better to just have Markdown support. That would be,
but that would still not solve the Pygment highlighting issue. I mean, you still have to make the tokens out of these single words and arguments thing, and because libdoc has the parser.
Yeah, but I mean, if I don't think having Pygments as a dependency when you are creating using libdoc, so that you actually are going to create distributable HTML documentation. I don't think that isn't a problem in my opinion. So we can use just Pygments, and then if you use Markdown with fenced code blocks and so on, where we declare it, then Pygments is going to be used eventually. So. But this is kind of getting off topic. I think so. The key thing is that I want us to move to Markdown, and if someone is interested in that stuff, there are a lot of kind of open questions. And the first question would be that what Markdown model should we use? Also, if someone really thinks the idea is that us implementing the basic Markdown support ourselves is good, then I think that would be fine as well. I think in general, I mean, if we would do that, then we should probably also distribute that make that a separate project, because I think others might also be interested because then that should be like single Python file thing that supports like simple restricted Markdown or something like that supports just the basic stuff. But there's always the problem if you support only the basic stuff, then people are asking more and more, and then you end up supporting the whole common mark and GFM and whatever, and then it's not any more simple and restricted. In which case, it would have been easier for us to just vendor something that already is there. Good. Questions about 7.2? We nicely went 1.5 hours. Well, it doesn't matter, but I actually need to kind of leave pretty much now, but if you have questions, then I'm still able to ask.
No, I think there are no questions at the moment on YouTube, and also not here in the chat. So you can stop sharing right now, and then I would end the YouTube stream, and we continue talking here in the Zoom a little bit without any recording and so on. So thank you very much. If you again want to be part of these discussions, join us on Slack, typically where the discussions are mostly vital. So if you want to find the Slack channel, go to robotframework.org and then search in the community section. You will see the Slack invite possibility, so you get an invite, and then you can search the Devil channel if you want to get involved with any development. And please also think about proposing a talk to RoboCon. So we have the RoboCon 2025 upcoming, begin February next week as an on-site conference in Helsinki. And we also have the online conference begin of March next year. And the call for proposal for talks is open, I think, until mid-October still. So we are looking for talks from everywhere from the world. If you want to come to Helsinki, also, of course, for the February one, otherwise pre-recorded ones. And we are also looking for workshops. So if you know stuff about Robot Framework and want to share your knowledge, you're welcome to propose a workshop for Helsinki as well. And so that's basically it. And also the ecosystem proposal should still be, not sure actually. Daniel, is it still open? Do you know?
Yes.
Until
Monday is the last day.
Okay, so if you're quick,
that's my time.
and you want to get some funding money for your Robot Framework ecosystem project, you can also propose an ecosystem, which will then be voted in the beginning of October, and maybe you get some funding money for that. Please only if you can implement it yourself and also can invoice us with this money. And yeah, so I wish you all a nice weekend. Stay safe and be nice to each other. And we hope to see you in Slack, in forum, or at RoboCon conference. Bye-bye.
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 So now the